Okay, so today we are going to be doing a little interactive read aloud. We're going to be doing an activity that goes along with it, and the activity is going to be associated with the book If We Were There When They Signed the Constitution. So, first, what I'm going to say is today we're going to learn how to infer. And inferring is when students make a guess or an observation based on facts. So it's when you look at something, so you look at a picture and you make educated guesses about it. You just assume what it is just based on prior knowledge and facts and observation from that picture. So today, to get us started, we're gonna do a little activity, which it's called Pack Your Suitcase. So we're gonna pretend that this bag is a suitcase, right? Because I didn't have a suitcase, it was big and I didn't want to bring it down here. So this is gonna be our suitcase today. So today what we're gonna do is I'm gonna have each one of you guys pick two. I'm gonna stick these upside down and each one of you guys are gonna pick two of them. And before you pick two of them, we're gonna think about the seasons. So we're gonna think about winter, summer, and fall. So go ahead and pick two of them.
And spring.
Yeah, there's spring. We're just gonna do winter, fall, and summer, if that's okay. So pick two. Can you pick two? Thank you. Okay, so now what I'm gonna ask you to do is flip them over. Don't say anything yet. And what I want you to think about, look at the two words you have and think about the seasons and think about what season you would wear those at. So we're gonna start with you, Easton. We're gonna have you tell us the two things that are on there.
Gloves and sandals.
So gloves and sandals. Okay, so as we think about gloves and sandals, where do you think you would wear gloves?
Winter.
Winter, and why would you want to wear gloves during winter?
Because they keep your hands warm and it helps with the snow and frostbite.
Exactly, you want to keep your hands warm at all times, hot, especially when it's cold outside, right? So what about sandals? What do you think the sandals would be?
Summer.
Summer, right? Why would you want to wear sandals?
Because it's hot and it's probably a lot easier because you go outside more.
Exactly. Yeah, and you don't have to worry about the cold. It's hot out. It's about 75 to 90 degrees, and it's just nice out, right? Okay, what do you got over here?
I got snowboard
Okay.
and beach bag.
A beach ball.
Beach
Okay,
ball.
so snowboard. Let's think about kind of what Easton said. So, looking at a snowboard, what season would you want to use a snowboard in? Would
Winter.
you winter? You wouldn't want to use it during summer to go on the sand? No way, huh? No. Okay, yeah. So like winter, and
That would be pretty fun.
it would be fun, huh? So and looking at the beach ball, when do you think what would you want to wear the beach ball?
In summer.
In summer, yeah, exactly. Because maybe you'll be outside. There'll be maybe at like City Park where there's a volleyball net where you could use the beach ball, right? Yeah. So what do you have over here?
Pumpkin and leaves.
A pumpkin and leaves. Ooh, that sounds like you got two of the same season, maybe. When would you use a pumpkin, or when would there be leaves? Those kind of correlate together, don't they?
You would see a pumpkin in fall.
Okay, yeah. And why? For pumpkins, when does pumpkin come around? What month is that usually?
October.
Yeah, right. October,
is
yeah.
Halloween.
Exactly. October is around Halloween, and that's when the fall. That's when the leaves start turning, right? And you said leaves is your second one.
Mhm.
And so when do leaves fall? When do the leaves fall?
In the fall.
Yeah, fall. And what usually happens with the leaves?
They fall on the ground and then become crumpled and
Yeah.
then blow around.
Exactly. They become crumpled during the fall, and then they start falling off. So in the springtime, they can bud out and come out again, huh? Perfect. So exactly. So why we did this activity is because as good readers, when we're reading a book, we want to understand what's going on. So when we're reading, we look at the text and we want to infer. And inferring is, so today what we're going to do is infer as we read, if you were there when you signed the Constitution. And inferring is when students make a guess based on facts and observations. So you look at something, you read a passage of a text, and you make facts and observations. You make guesses based off the text, right? So what we're doing when we're reading a text is we're trying to understand what's going on based off making observation and facts of what we think. So we could use our prior knowledge based off that. So what we're doing there is inferring. So what I'm gonna do is so today so as we're sitting in our spots, we're about to read a book together. So can one of you guys just raise your hand for me and just tell me about, so recently we're going through an election, right? Do you know what an election is?
It's when you vote for a president.
Exactly. So we're gonna have a new president here soon, possibly, right? Joe Biden.
Have one.
Exactly. He got elected. So we're gonna have a new president. So when this happens, there's a law that's happening. So can one of you guys tell me what would happen if none of us voted? Like, what if we didn't go what would happen?
Other colonies and countries would attack us.
Yeah.
We wouldn't do anything because we wouldn't have a leader.
That's a good point, yeah, because if nobody went and voted for a president, we wouldn't have a designated president to help protect us and protect us from a different country. So if there wasn't people that voted for a president, we might, face problems with different countries. That's a good one. Does anyone else have something if we didn't vote? What do you think, Ethan? What do you think?
That there wait, I forgot.
I have one.
What do you think?
The laws would get broken a lot more, which would mean things aren't safe.
Exactly. The
Safe?
laws would get broken and things wouldn't be safe, because it's important to have laws, right? And when we read this book, we might see something that mentions the laws, because we're going to be reading about the Constitution. So
The Constitution writes all the
And a
laws.
lot of people
Yup.
would fight over being a leader.
yeah, exactly.
I remembered mine. Like if we didn't have a president, no one would build houses when people come in.
Yeah,
They'll just be left in the cold.
exactly. Yeah, you wouldn't have a house or any protection.
And no one would say you could go to school.
Yeah, school's a good thing, so we need to be there. Okay, so today, what's gonna happen is we're gonna make inference about the book if you were there when you signed the Constitution. So from time to time when we read, we want to understand in this book of who, what, where, about the American history. So what goes on and what, how we were founded and stuff like that. So this is gonna be important as we read. You guys are gonna pay attention. I'm gonna ask you a few questions, and we might stop during the text just to talk about some texts, and we're gonna infer with those texts that we're doing. So as we start, I'm gonna open this up and I'm gonna start reading to you guys. All right. So what is the Constitution? The Constitution of the United States is the basic law of our nation, like the rules of a game. Only these rules are for the government, and all citizens must play. The Constitution sets up the rules for how laws are made and who will make the laws. Who will decide if we go to war? Who will have power? You or me? The Constitution of the United States was written in 1787. It has lasted 200 years longer than any other written constitution. The men who wrote it wanted their new nation to last. They knew how hard it was going to create a government that could change with times. After all, they had just fought and won the war against a government that had refused to change. The war was the American Revolution.
I read that book of I Survived the American Revolution.
It's also,
Really?
isn't it when they broke off from King George and
Yeah.
he sent armies and to try to bring them back to him so
Exactly.
he could have both power?
Yep, King George played a big role in that, yes. So, as we're looking at this, what was the Declaration of Independence? So on July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence officially declared the American colonies free and independent, It has become one of the most famous documents in the world. It declares that all men are created equal. It said that 13 colonies were now 13 free states, free from the king in England. But notice, it didn't say that the 13 states were united. The rebels didn't know if they could win their revolution. 1/3 of the people in the colonies stayed loyal to the king. One of the singers of the Declaration of Independence was Benjamin Franklin. He begged the 13 new states to work together. We must all hang together, or surely we shall all hang separately, he said. So what did the King of England think of the Declaration of Independence? Ben Franklin was right. King George wanted to hang all the rebels. The king sent more than 100 ships full of soldiers to fight the American rebels. General George Washington led the revolution against England. During the long Revolutionary War, General Washington gathered around him young men from all over the 13 states. These young men thought of themselves as fighting for a nation, not for their state. 6 years after the Revolution, in 1786, several of these young men would go to Philadelphia with George Washington to help write the Constitution. So, as we're looking at this and as we just read, it mentioned the Declaration of Independence, right? So, as we say here, it says, what was the Declaration of Independence? And one of the things that it says July 4th, 1776. And the author puts that date in italics. Does any of you guys know what italics is? Can you tell me?
I forgot.
You forgot? Do you know?
Fancy letters?
Yeah, it's fancy letters. It's different letters than what they usually put, right? So italics are used generally for emphasis. So the author wants you to focus strictly on that text. So tell me why you think July 4th, 1776 would be an important date. Yeah?
That's the day that we broke free from the king.
Exactly, because the king, he had those 13 states. And on July 4th, it was, we got free. We went to our own states, right? So we were no longer in hold of the king, right? The king didn't have our state. So when you look at the July 4th every year, what happens on the July 4th? Why do we celebrate, or what do we do?
To celebrate us being free and not being controlled by another state.
Exactly, being free and not being controlled by another state. And what do we usually do for celebrations on July 4th?
We launch fireworks.
Launch fireworks. What else do we do? Do we eat good food? Yeah, and these are all reasons because of what again? Because we were free on that date, right? That was when the Declaration of Independence happened.
That was the first day that we were free. And in Rwanda, they hand out candy.
Yeah, exactly.
Except for COVID, but
yeah,
we had a big parade.
COVID was a halt, huh? Yeah, exactly. So you guys, that was exactly it. On the July 4th, the author wants us to infer about on July 4th that was when us as the 13 states got to be free. We were no longer in hold of the king in England.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm glad we're not controlled by a...
Okay, so yeah, me either, right? Okay, so let's go on to this page. So what rules did the 13 states have before the Constitution? The 13 states knew they couldn't fight a revolution without helping each other. Right in the middle of the revolution, they wrote a set of rules for themselves. They called this Agreement of the Articles of Confederation. Under the Articles of Confederation, the 13 states elected a Congress, a group of people to make the laws. In this Congress, each state had one vote. No matter how many people lived in that state, the articles could not be changed unless every state agreed. How well did Congress work under the Articles of Confederation? Not very well at all. The rebel government needed money to fight the war, but there was no way to make the states pay up. If the fighting was in New York, the states far away would not send money. General Washington had to go to Congress again and again, beg for bullets, food, and clothes for his rebel soldiers. James Madison from Virginia was a young rebel, congressman. He wanted to help Washington and his soldiers. He decided that the Articles of Confederation did not work because Congress could not make the state tax people had to pay for the war. Alexander Hamilton was a young aide to General Washington. In 1780, while the revolution was still going on, he wrote, "There is only one remedy, to call a convention of all the states, and the sooner the better." Alexander Hamilton and James Madison were two of the leaders of the fight to get a new constitution. So, as we're looking at this page, it says right here, the author says, how well did Congress work under the Articles of Confederation? So the author is mentioning Congress a lot. So, can any one of you guys, what do you, when you see the word Congress, what do you think? Does any of you guys know?
I think it means like a group of people can control like the government.
Yeah, a
Like
group
a
of,
group of important people.
yeah, so like a group of important people. You said a group of people that control the government, right? Yeah, so Congress is a branch of the government. So have you guys heard of the word before then? Congress? Yeah, right? So think of the election right now. Do you think Congress is playing a big role in the election?
Yes.
Yes, because
They're counting all the votes.
they're counting all the votes, they're deciding who's going to go on, and during this process, there's a lot of laws and rules that they have to follow in order for a new president to be elected, right? Yeah, so what the author wants us to do is infer about the word Congress, because the author thinks the word Congress is important for the Constitution, right? And it is, because like you said, it's a part of the branch of the government. Okay, so why did the 13 states unite into a real nation? The states were fighting a war to make sure they weren't ruled and taxed by a government far away. The rebels wanted to control their own lives. During the revolution, most states wrote their own constitutions. Each state elected its own leaders. They were proud to be free of kings. One reason nobody thought the 13 states could be one nation was that we were so big, 10 times bigger than the most other countries, 1,200 miles long from north to south. It took 2 weeks for people to get news from one state to another. If you lived in Boston, you probably thought of your nation as the state of Massachusetts. Your money wasn't good in Rhode Island. When William Houston of Georgia went to New York, he wrote that he was learning his country to go to a strange land amongst strangers. What happened after we won the Revolutionary War? It was time to great experience in government, but the newly free states enjoyed making their own rules. But they had many problems, especially with the foreign countries. England had lost the war, but she refused to leave the forts in the West, even though the peace treaty said, "Make me," said England. "We have no way of making anyone do anything." The minute the revolution was over, the men in the army went home. Nobody had paid their wages for months, and nobody wanted to pay taxes. There was no way to make England give up the forts. That wasn't at all. So, on this page, they're talking about laws. So as we think about laws, and as we were mentioning before, the election just happened. Why is a law important?
It tells people what they should and shouldn't do, and if they break the law, then they get in trouble.
Exactly. So it tells people what they shouldn't do and what they should do, right? And if they don't do it, they get in trouble, right? Because it's a law. It's a set rule. So
it's like a simple rule.
Yeah.
That you can get in trouble by with what, like, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. It's a rule that's set, and if you break it, you might get in trouble.
Like going down the speed limit.
Exactly, going over the speed limit was one. So why are laws created?
To not have chaos.
To keep us safe. To what?
To make chaos.
Yeah, no chaos. Do you have an idea?
To make them not like crash into everything and go over the speed limit and someone might die.
Yeah, exactly. You got
like if you go over a cliff.
Yeah, you got to pay attention to the laws.
So
what we're gonna do right now, we're gonna just go one by one, and we're gonna make a list of laws. So we're just each gonna name one law. So can you name a law?
Stealing.
Stealing. You can't steal, right? That's a law. I'm gonna say you have to be 18 in order to vote. That's a law. What about you?
Stop at a stop sign.
Stop at a stop sign. What about you?
Don't murder anybody.
Don't hurt anybody. Exactly. And these are laws. These are all laws to help keep us protected. So what they're saying is, in the Constitution, do you think there's a lot of laws? Yes, that they had to abide with. During this election, do you think they have to follow a lot of laws when they're counting the votes and when they're electing a new president in? Right? Yeah. So like a big thing is right now is Trump, he thinks that there was fraudulent votes. So he has the right to see if those were really fraudulent. That's a law. It's in the Constitution.
That they can check those.
Yeah, that they can check to see if that was actual votes, right? So those are laws that are set for us and set for the United States. And that's why the Constitution is so important, is because it sets laws for us to follow along.
Was there actually fraud?
They don't know. No, there probably wasn't, but we don't know. That's the great thing about the Constitution, is you have the right to do that, whether it was true.
Make sure.
Yeah, whether it was true or not true. So we're gonna start over here. Did Shays' rebellion lead to the writing in the Constitution? Historians have agreed 4 years about exactly how and why we came to write the Constitution. Were the writers scared that the revolution had brought too much liberty, or did they want to make sure that the revolution lasted? Certainly Shays' rebellion shook up many people, but there were many other reasons why people wanted a new constitution. George Washington and other leaders of the revolution wanted to see a stronger united nation. They wanted this nation to have only one money system. They felt we needed to be one of the nation to make treaties with Europe. We needed an army and navy if we had to go to war again. They were looking for any excuse to try to bring the states together to write a new constitution. Okay, so how did the 13 states finally agree to meet in Philadelphia? James Madison had the bright idea to use a quarrel between two states as an excuse to bring all the states together. Virginia and Maryland started fighting over whose ships could go up and down the river that was a boundary of both states. Madison called for a convention of Annapolis, Maryland in September 1786 to discuss the problem of trade between all the states. Only 5 out of the 13 states sent delegates. A delegate is someone who's chosen to speak in or act for a group. They called for another conference to be held in Philadelphia on the second Monday in May 1787. It was at this convention in Philadelphia that our Constitution was written. Of course, at the time, no one called it the Constitutional Convention. They didn't know they were going to write a constitution. They called it the Grand Convention or the Federal Convention. So, as we're looking at this page, the author mentions Philadelphia a few times, right? So, do you guys know where Philadelphia is?
It's no.
No. So Philadelphia is located in Pennsylvania, and it's close to New York. And so the Constitution was made and signed here, as the author is saying. So the author was mentioning Philadelphia because at that time, as they were saying, they didn't know that was going to be the Constitution where it was going to be signed. But to this day, that it's still history, because in Philadelphia on that day, the Constitution was written and signed by a bunch of prestigious people. So yeah, the author is trying to let us infer, because remember what we were talking about inferring, about how we want to look at the text and infer. So it mentions Philadelphia a lot. So the author is probably telling us that Philadelphia is an important thing, right?
Like John Kennedy.
Yeah, exactly, like John Kennedy. So, as we mentioned, Philadelphia is important because what?
Because it's in our history of the Constitution.
Yeah, it's in the
United
history of our
States.
Constitution of the United States, right?
It's for all it's for most of the states sending people.
Exactly. So that's great. So let's go to here.
And it's where most of the most important people met.
Exactly. There was a lot of prestigious people there, huh? Yes.
Like George Washington, the president, and
Yep. Okay, so what happened when the Constitution opened? Almost nothing. It had been rainiest spring in history. All the roads were mud. Hardly anyone showed up on time. On opening day, only a few Virginians and the men who lived in Philadelphia were there. Poor James Madison, who had come to 11 days early, was practically alone. George Washington arrived on Sunday, May 13, 1786, the day before the convention was to begin. The sun came out for the first time in weeks. Washington was met by a number of his old troops, all in uniform and shiny black boots. The people stood on the cobblestone streets and cheered and cheered. So, as we look at this, we're going to go back. There's the bell.
That's for the first graders.
First grade, okay, perfect.
No, that's for kinder.
So as we're looking at this picture, we see a lot of flags, and usually, and you guys can look at this, get a good idea of what's going on here. There's lots of boats, lots of flags. So every day when you guys come into school, what do?
We do the Pledge of Allegiance.
The Pledge of Allegiance, and what do we look at?
We look at
flag.
The American flag, right? So, in the Constitution, do you think that the flag resembles something?
Yeah.
What do you guys think it resembles?
Oh, I think I know.
Yeah, tell it.
So the stripes, there's 13.
Yeah.
And that resembles the 13 original colonies.
Exactly.
And then the 50 stars resemble
the 50 states, right?
the 50 states that
Exactly.
came out of the 13 original
So that's
colonies.
pretty important in the Constitution, right? So that's why, as we're looking at this picture, it's the American flag is pretty important because it resembles part of our Constitution. It's an important. Which this picture is about when they were coming to sign the Philadelphia. But as we're looking at, if you're looking at American flag, you can, like you said, it's important because the 13 stripes are the 13 colonies and the 50 stars are the 50 states, right? So let's see here. Okay, so a flag is just, it's bigger than the flag, right? It resembles something in the Constitution. Okay, so as soon as Washington arrived, he called on the only other man in America, as famous as he was, Dr. Benjamin Franklin. We do not know what Washington and Franklin talked about. They might have met under the mulberry tree in Franklin's garden, a favorite place for him to sit. We do not know that Franklin laid in a good bottle of port for them to drink. So as we're looking at this, Franklin, two important people were meeting. So, and it was during the Constitution. So maybe they were talking about some sort of laws that were happening, right? Because they were getting ready to sign a law. So, can you guys tell me, do you remember what a law is? Do you remember what a law is?
A rule.
A rule, right? It protects us, it protects the United States. So maybe they were getting ready to talk about an important law that was occurring.
It
So,
also keeps peace.
what's that?
It keeps peace.
Yeah, it helps us keep peace, right? Yeah, so as we're looking at law, we were understanding that they were about ready to sign a big thing, and it was probably part of American history, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here we go. Where did the delegates stay? Many delegates stayed in the Indian Queen and Inn. A young black servant with powdered hair and a red cape met them at the door. So many delegates stayed in the Indian Queen, and the landlord set aside a special dining room for them. George Washington stayed at the home of his good friend Robert Morris, who was also a delegate to the convention. Morris had helped to get their money to fight the revolution. Morris would end up in jail for his debts, but in 1787 he was one of the richest men in Philadelphia. So there again we see Philadelphia, right? And that's an important date. The author always wants us to know what happened in Philadelphia, and we talked about that, right? So let's go. What stands out to you guys on this page? Can you see what's going on here?
Very fancy.
Yeah,
Why do they have purple coats?
purple coats. Just because it was probably fancy during that time. So do you think everyone can go to this?
No,
In Philadelphia?
that's
No.
like a fancy ball.
Yeah. Do you think you had to be invited to go here?
And you have to be a pretty important person.
Yeah, exactly. So George Washington there. So you must know that
So that's pretty
he's
important.
pretty important now. He's a prestigious person, right?
He's the first president.
Exactly. Very prestigious president. So, during this time, we're gonna think, pair, and share about what we see in this. So we'll start with you and just kind of tell me one thing that you see, why it's important. Why would the author put this here? It's a pretty big picture, so it must be something important, right?
That's maybe like their first night in Philadelphia writing the Constitution.
First night in Philadelphia, writing the Constitution. That's good. What do you think?
It's like a celebration for winning the war.
Celebration for the winning war. That's good.
Maybe it's. See, if
Or
it
the
was,
song.
if it was Morris, maybe it was about having a constitution, winning the war, and having peace.
Yeah.
And, a lot of the states came.
Yeah.
And so maybe their friend, his friend, maybe Robert Morris, maybe volunteered.
Yeah, so Robert Morris was there. So the author obviously wants to know something. They're getting ready. They're in Philadelphia, and they're getting ready to sign the Constitution. So what happened on that night was they signed the Constitution, as we talked about before, in Philadelphia, and it goes down still to this day as one of the most important dates that happened, right? Because it set us free from those 13 colonies, right?
15.
So, and then okay, let's skip to this page right here. We're gonna go to the end. So, why is the Constitution called a miracle? George Washington called the Constitution a miracle, so did James Madison, and many historians have called it a miracle since then. It is a miracle because it was written so quickly. It took less than 4 months, but a bad constitution could have been written just as fast. It is a miracle because it had lasted so long. Bad governments can last 200 years. In the 1787, the United States had 13 states and fewer than 4 million people. Today, we have 50 states and more than 248 million.
Whoa.
That's crazy, huh? That's a lot of people that was since then. During the fight to ratify the Constitution, some people argued that if we were the one nation, we could split up into special interests. The farmers would stick together, the merchants, Catholics against Protestants. Madison wrote that the joining together to lobby or pressure your government for your special interests is important. Madison thought that it was a good if a republic was big. If the country was big enough, no one's special interests could rule over the others. Madison and most of the other delegates wanted to make up a government that would never allow one group to have too much power over a smaller group. Madison and Hamilton knew the nation would get bigger. The real miracle of the Constitution is that men who wrote it had so much respect for the need of people to control and change their government. Otherwise, the piece of paper they were writing would never have lasted except as a piece of paper under the glass. So, as we read this book and part of it, we talked about some important things that the author wanted us to understand, right? And what we were, as I said before in the beginning, what were we doing when we were reading those texts? Do you remember what that word was?
Laws, Constitution.
Laws, Constitution, yeah.
Philadelphia.
Philadelphia, exactly. Do you remember any of the important parts that we were talking about?
I was going to say Philadelphia.
Philadelphia, that was very important. And what were we doing? Were we inferring?
Yeah.
Yeah, right? Because
You were guessing some stuff.
exactly, and inferring is making observation.
Revolution.
Yeah, we were making observation and guesses about the Constitution and Revolution. So, how did we decide in the story what was important and what wasn't important?
What was important was Philadelphia, laws, and the Constitution, and then the other things were kind of important,
Yeah.
but not as.
Exactly, and you said by the words he was using, right?
By the words.
So remember when the author used italics? Do we remember what italics means?
Yeah,
What was it?
fancy words or like different words from bold.
Yeah, different words from bold. The author is trying to make us emphasize on something, correct?
That means that word's kind of important in the story.
Exactly.
Like in a nonfiction book, it's bold.
Yeah, it's
This
bold.
is a nonfiction book, right?
It is, yep.
But like
It's
sometimes
in
it's
fancy.
bold.
So what I'm gonna ask you guys, how did we use this text to understand inference? Remember what inference is, what I was telling you?
Basing a ending from the facts that we already knew.
Yeah, from the facts we already knew. So we were using prior knowledge based on this, huh? You guys had a lot of prior knowledge. You guys knew a lot about the Constitution and American history. So what background knowledge do we know now on American history? So what was important about this book? Was the Constitution? It was talking about the Constitution, right?
That's like basically the title of the book. If
Exactly.
we were there when they signed the Constitution.
Exactly. So that's pretty important, huh? Okay, so now that we were talking a little more about the Constitution in the 1970s, what are some thoughts you guys are having? Do you guys have any thoughts or questions?
Why was Benjamin Franklin so famous?
Because he was part of the Constitution. He came during that time, and he was one of the guys that helped make the Constitution and sign the Constitution.
He was also a very good inventor. Wasn't he one of the ones that created the printer?
Yeah, exactly.
The light bulb?
Yep, he's very smart, right?
He
No, not the
also
light bulb.
he also figured out how to. He didn't do it. Did he do electricity?
Electricity, no, that wasn't Benjamin Franklin.
I don't think he did a light bulb.
Yeah,
either.
that might have been
He
Einstein.
did the printer.
Yeah.
The first.
So-
And, what else? He also figured out that if you have a key and lightning, it
Yeah.
connects really well. So
Yeah,
if a key on a kite.
yeah.
I think that's kind of odd, but
Yeah, that's all right. So as we finish up this book, we were talking about inference, and we made a lot of inferences today, right? We made inferences about Philadelphia. We talked about how the 13 colonies were separated, the 13 states. We finally got free. We talked about laws and rules. And do you think those are all pivotal places for American history?
yes,
Yeah.
very important.
Do you think if those rules, laws, or the Constitution wasn't signed, do you think the world would be as it is right now?
It would be chaotic. It would be.
It would
at
just,
school.
yeah.
It would be falling apart.
It just wouldn't. We wouldn't have a basic structure, right?
Like
And-
basically like.
It would
fall
be like
apart.
falling apart.
yeah.
We'd be
So
like crumbling. Like the world is a cookie and we're just crumbling.
yeah, I was just going. So as you guys read text, and when Mrs. Nielsen helps you out, remember when she's pointing out those big ideas, what you guys are doing is you guys are making inferences about those big ideas, right? So today you learned that an inference is observation or facts based on the text. So we're taking text and breaking it apart. So today we learned a lot about the American history and why the Constitution was so important. I want to thank you guys for your time and helping me with this lesson and reading. And that should conclude it. So thank you guys.
I made a house.